Well, I think there are a couple of problems with the conventional argument. It's simply not the case that taxes have to go up in the future if the debt goes up.
You and your family are looking at a $20 trillion national debt.
We owe it to our children and grandchildren to act now,
to make sure we aren't buried under a mountain of debt.
We want to lift this crushing burden of debt off of our children and grandchildren.
The government debt is not a burden on anyone.
It's exactly the opposite of what the Orthodox story tells us.
You and I buy things with the money we earn. Governments buy things with money they get from taxes.
The government doesn't need your taxes.
When the government receives tax dollars, they are destroyed.
This is the MMT Podcast with Patricia Pino and Christian Riley. Hi, I'm Christian Riley and welcome to the Modern Monetary Theory Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at MMT Podcast, and you can support the show by going to patreon.com/MMT Podcast. For as little as $1 a month, you can get early access to all our episodes and patron-only episodes. A big thank you to all our supporters so far. At the beginning there, you heard a clip from Finding the Money, which is a documentary being produced by our guest this week, Maren Poitras. And later we're going to be talking to Maren about the film and her journey into learning MMT and the challenge that a lot of us face when we start to understand it, which is how to tell other people about it. If you're new to MMT, here's a quick overview. And apologies to regular listeners for the repetition, but here goes. If you live in a country where the government issues its own currency, like say the UK, the US, Japan, Canada, or Australia, to name a few, the government spends by issuing new currency into existence. It doesn't get a physical thing we call money from somewhere else in order to spend it out again. It just changes bank balances at its central bank using computer keystrokes. So if you want to think of money as a thing that comes into being, then the central bank's computer keyboard is the magic money tree, and the congressional or parliamentary approval for the government spending is the thing that puts the fruit on the tree. When you pay taxes to central government, your bank balance is lowered by the same process, computer keystrokes. So you can think of the government spending money into existence and then removing some of it from existence via taxes. Notice the government has to spend first before it can tax. Otherwise, nobody can have any money to pay their taxes with. If you or I try to create money, it's called counterfeiting, and I believe it's frowned upon. So the government spends some money into existence and taxes some out of existence. The government usually spends more into existence than it taxes back, which is nice for us. In the private sector, that means we've got some spending money. Wait, did you just say the government usually spends more than it taxes? Doesn't that mean the government's usually in deficit? Oh my God, think of the grandchildren. Calm down, inner anxiety. Of course, the government's usually in deficit. That deficit is residing in all our private sector bank accounts, and we generally like to have as much of that deficit as possible because the government's deficit is the private sector's surplus. It's our money. When people start to understand this, then have to go back to engaging with mainstream politics where commentators who should know better try to create anxiety about the size of the government deficit. Again, that's the private sector's surplus, and how we're all going to have to sacrifice to shrink the deficit. Again, that's erasing our money. When you consider the death toll due to austerity in the UK was around the 120,000 mark, and that was before coronavirus. When you realise that was all justified with a completely false narrative about money, it gets very hard to sit still, and that's why we end up reaching out any way we can to try and communicate what's really going on with government deficits and the myths surrounding them. So I think we're really lucky to have a skilled filmmaker like Maren who understands how urgent this is and how to communicate it. A few things before we dive in. Somewhere near the beginning of the conversation, you'll hear Maren say that a light bulb moment for her was discovering that commercial banks create money when they lend. And if it's the first time you're hearing it, we also have a whole episode about that called Understanding Endogenous Money. And that's episode 43 with Sam Levy. We also refer to a sectoral balances chart in the conversation, and it's a dramatic illustration of how the government deficit is the private sector's surplus. And there's a link to that in the show notes. So we're going to play the audio of the trailer for Finding the Money, and we've linked to where you can watch the video of it and financially support the film's development in the show notes. When you watch the trailer, I think you'll agree it's going to be a real game changer for getting the word out there, and that's what we're all here for. Finally, as ever, we thank you for the support you give us with your time and attention and by recommending us to other people. And if you are able to help us financially, there's a link to our Patreon page in the show notes. Support starts at $1 a month and it really helps keep the show going. So here's the trailer for Finding the Money. Enjoy.
Well, I think there are a couple of problems with the conventional argument. It's simply not the case that taxes have to go up in the future if the debt goes up.
You and your family are looking at a $20 trillion national debt.
We owe it to our children and grandchildren to act now.
To make sure we aren't buried under a mountain of debt.
We want to lift this crushing burden of debt off of our children and grandchildren.
The government debt is not a burden on anyone.
It's exactly the opposite of what the Orthodox story tells us.
You and I buy things with the money we earn. Governments buy things with money they get from taxes.
The government doesn't need your taxes.
When the government receives tax dollars, they are destroyed.
The federal government doesn't use the money they collect from the rest of us to pay the bills. I know that that's kind of shocking when people hear that because we've all been trained to think that our taxes pay for the military and for roads and bridges and so forth.
Introducing this radical idea is Stephanie Kelton.
If we want to fund a new program, the question is, how are you going to pay for it? Where will you get the money? You have to find the money. We believe the government has no money of its own. There is only taxpayer money. The only way government can fund programs is if it can find the money.
It's not a matter of finding the money. They don't find the money, they create it. They create it through a keystroke.
The federal government doesn't need your money to fund itself. Does that mean that we don't need to tax? No, taxes are super important and absolutely we must tax.
The government doesn't need money. The government needs us to need money.
An unconventional economic theory is gaining some traction, modern monetary theory,
or the initials MMT for short.
And one of its leading proponents is Professor Stephanie Kelton. She has advised Bernie Sanders' campaign.
Do you want me to smile?
Are we thinking about how the government spends money and what it can spend money on all wrong? What she's talking about will be at the center of our politics.
Most economists used to ignore these ideas as fringe or far out, and a lot of them still do.
First they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, and then you win. And for many years, we felt ignored.
We're borrowing trillions of dollars from China.
Does the government have to borrow dollars? No, of course not.
But at some point, they started laughing at us, and we sort of celebrated because we said, okay, well, we left the first stage. We're not ignored anymore. Now we're to the then they ridicule you stage.
Many lawmakers are buying into this modern monetary theory. This notion is absurd, yet our colleagues use this theory to justify the cost of programs like the Green New Deal.
The correct way to budget for a Green New Deal is to do it the way we did it for World War II.
And then to the fight you stage.
Bill Gates recently took exception with MMT, calling it crazy talk.
It's not government debt, it's taxpayer debt.
It is very difficult to reverse a paradigm.
And so we're in the fight you stage.
We need to do something.
There are a whole lot of powerful interests that view as a threat the program that our economic framework makes possible. So they're fighting against it. So do I think we're going to win? I won't say no, but it's going to be a hell of a fight.
So that was the trailer for Finding the Money, and you can watch the trailer by going to findingmoneyfilm.com. There's a link to that in our show notes. And now, here's our conversation with the woman behind it all, Maren Poitras. Let's dive in. Hi, Maren Poitras. Welcome to the MMT podcast. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're also here with Patricia P&O. Say hi to everyone.
Hey.
And you're very busy at the moment producing a film featuring Stephanie Kelton, Randall Ray, Matt Forstater. It's called Finding the Money.
Thank
the
you.
trailer looks amazing. I can't wait to see the film. So I think, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to even know about MMT. Or was it the case that you were spending so much time filming economists that you just learned by osmosis? How did it go down?
Yeah, so definitely not the latter, but it was really kind of a long, circuitous route for me. You know, I come from more of a background of environmental science, and so I guess concern about climate change and these kind of issues, as well as, you know, inequality, so tied with that. But for me, I guess I would mark it to around the time when I read Naomi Klein's Capitalism versus the Climate, really, and just kind of trying to understand what it is about this thing we call the economy or capitalism. You know, is it just inexorable that capitalism will lead to kind of destruction of the environment or climate change? Or, you know, is there another way to organize the economy? Like, what would a different economy look like that was sustainable or that provided prosperity for folks in a sustainable manner? Well, that first led me to ecological economics. Even just the first random book I picked up from a library, you know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, 5 years ago or so, there was a statement in there that just casually mentioned something about how banks create money out of thin air when they make a loan. You know, they just kind of mentioned that, and I was like, wait, what? You know? And so for some reason, you know, that kind of hooked me and just kept me searching to understand how exactly that could happen and how that all plays out, how that works, the mechanics of it. But then again, with ecological economics, you know, the circuitous route led maybe first to public banking and positive money in the UK, and then eventually, that led me to MMT, where everything just started to fell into place and made a lot more intuitive sense. And this is over, you know, maybe the process of years of researching and just reading every book I could get a hold of and finally ending up at MMT. So I certainly did not start filming or talking to folks until I felt like I had a grasp of what this was. And that definitely took years of research. I mean, listening to podcasts, I'm sure I've listened to you all before I even, you know, reached out to Stephanie and the folks at MMN and went to the first conference. The first conference I went to was the New York one in 2018. So I started some filming there, and that's basically when the film kicked off. It's like about a year ago.
I was there. I must have seen you.
Yeah, I remember you on some panels, but I was just kind of, you know, I was wandering around with the camera.
You know, shame I didn't meet you back then, but love to meet you now.
Yeah, I know. It's taken a while, but, you know, it's really been important to get to know the folks involved and build up some relationships and really make sure I have a really good grasp, I think, on this and what, you know, because I don't want to portray anything inaccurate or unhelpful for the folks that have put so much of their lives, you know, into this work. So I think, it's really important to me to have a good grasp. And once I did see that full picture, you know, once it kind of all came together for me, it was just even more impetus to say, how is this story not already out there? You know, like, this is just the biggest story in the world, right? I mean, of course, I might be biased, but it's so relevant to even our everyday political debate and then our everyday lives of, you know, if we're surviving or not, and if the environment is surviving or not. So I'm trying to break it down to that level, you know, even though it can get a bit heady sometimes or a bit esoteric. I'm always trying to bring it back down. You know, why is this important and why is this such an important story to share? My first step was to see, you know, there must be someone else working on this, you know, making this story. So my first few months or a while was always just asking, so, you know, who else is working on this? What other, you know, filmmakers or media makers? And then I finally was pointed to Paul Thomas, an amazing filmmaker from the UK, who did start a project 5 or 6 years ago. So the story is there, but it hasn't been told yet. So he started, but still is in the process of communicating the ideas, and being in the UK is a bit hard to follow the story in the US. So I don't want to speak for him or anything, but he's been super amazingly helpful and just really nice to talked to another filmmaker who's grappled with this subject matter. The point is, no one else was doing it, so someone's got to do it. And for me, I wasn't necessarily searching just for a random project or a random film to cover. This is the subject matter that I'm very passionate about right now. And, a lot of other things interest me as well. And I think there are a lot of easier films out there to make, a lot of, more self-contained stories, maybe more clear character arc. But so I'm attracted to these other stories as well. But this one is just so politically relevant, so dramatic for me. And I find it just fascinating, and a story. I'm just constantly frustrated by every political debate I have to watch, or every person who says, I would support this progressive program, but we just can't afford it. How are you going to pay for it? Where are you going to find the money? And that debate just grates on me so much now, as I'm sure it does you both as well. The fear over the national debt, I just can't allow such a misperception to continue perpetuating the way it does, right?
The film looks amazing. What I was going to say is, how many people are working on this project? Is it just yourself for now, or do you have a big team?
Well, I wish I had a big team, but it is basically just myself for now. So hopefully that's evolving. And thanks to the crowdfunding campaign so far, I'm now talking to some great editors to bring an editor on board. So that's really exciting. I'm really excited to have collaborators. I've had great advice from other filmmakers, some other producers I work with, and Paul Thomas, who had been working on this. He's been very helpful, and Billy Sauce and his wife Megan have also helped. Billy and his brother Chris helped me at the 2019 MMT conference when we did kind of our master interview shoot. We set up a studio actually in Stephanie's husband's office, but we set up our kind of master interview that weekend, so I wasn't able to interact with folks at that conference either, unfortunately, because we were hunkered down in this studio doing, just hours-long interviews with a lot of the main folks in MMT. Not all of them, unfortunately. We had 3 solid days of probably, 24 hours of interviewing. And, Stephanie sat for 3-hour interview. Randy Ray sat for over 4 hours of an interview. So I got to hand it to them for making all of this happen as well. So that was really helpful anyway, to have Billy Sauce, who does Money on the Left, and his brother. So we've gotten support from the MMN community in that way. And then so far it has been just me, but sometimes that's a bit of the process with an independent film. But now that the teaser's out, now that I've decided to make it public, now's the time to find more collaborators. So I am hoping to bring on a producer and an editor at least to start with.
Yeah, we'll link to all the stuff that people need to know in the show notes. And I'll just jump in and say MMN is the Modern Money Network, and I'll link to them in the show notes as well. But that's Rowan Gray and Nathan Tanker's previous guests of ours. That's their network that they've pulled together starting a few years ago. And so I was just curious about when you made the jump from reading general economics, ecological economics, and then MMT, you were reading about positive money, about, banks creating credit when they just mark up balances on their spreadsheets like commercial banks. When you came across MMT for the first time, about the state involvement in this, a state-centered approach, basically. Apparently that was going to be the subtitle of their macroeconomics book last year. It was going to be a state-centered approach to modern money. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Can you remember the first sort of bit of information that came into your consciousness that turned your head to MMT?
I guess I can't pinpoint exactly. It was definitely when I read Randy Ray's book, the MMT Primer.
Oh, right.
That's really my first in-depth information from them. So, and at that point, I was kind of steeped in this, I don't know what they call it now. I don't even remember, but the positive money, what do they even call the positive money kind of train of thought? But, there was a bit of conflict there as well, because they were saying, MMT doesn't have, they have it wrong. So I was kind of figuring out, well, where exactly do they have it wrong? Or what is Randy Ray saying and where is it wrong? But by the time I read Randy Ray and dove into it further, I ended up agreeing much more with MMT, that they just made much more sense. And so I'm not sure exactly what did it, but just everything he said, I could grasp that and it would make sense. Whereas struggling with understanding bank money, took a long time and it was never quite as intuitive for me. But MMT, it is more intuitive. They bring in the sectoral balances. These other approaches never did that. They don't focus on the currency issuer aspect of the state and then even the history as well. So Randy Wray is an expert in a lot of monetary history. So it also, Randy Wray's book was the first. The next book where I think it really all came together for me was actually Felix Martin's book, Money, an Unauthorized Biography.
Wow.
Have you guys read that?
No, this is the first time I've heard of it as well, so that's to my shame. What's the name of the author again, Maren?
Felix Martin. He's actually in the UK as well, I believe.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it's not like 100% MMT, but he references Randy Wray and others. So it is very much along that vein. But he's a good storyteller, and he brings in a lot of historical references. And then I guess with David Graeber as well, I think Felix Martin also brings in the myth of barter, all of these things. But other examples from history over time, really illuminating, kind of for me, when it finally made sense was really this dual nature of money, right? Like this balance that money always has two sides in a way. And for me, visually, that looks like a tally stick that can be broken in half. And one half is the debt and one half is the credit. Or a balance sheet, you have one side the debt, one other side the credit. And then even going to the sectoral balance graph, it's this balancing mirror image that really shows the dual nature of money as both a credit and a debt. And that takes a second to get. And, maybe Randy Wray in his book said, oh, money is debt. And that's quite a statement. Like that's, what do you do with that? What do you do with that? What the heck does that mean? Well, then what is money and what is debt? That kind of flips your world upside down. It was really once I read a lot of the historical anecdotes and the stories from the past that things fell into place for me, and I felt I had a much stronger grasp of what was going on, and then I could dive into more of the details, having at least a framework where I could plug everything in, and I didn't have as many questions coming up. I mean, it was years of just questions, and then finally things fell into place, and it was like, okay, well, now I can just put questions in this framework, and it all seems to make sense. I can kind of describe what's happening in the world today, and it makes sense. The phenomenon you see in the economy, that makes sense once you get the framework, right, of MMT. So I guess the whole goal of the film is to guide people through that journey in a little bit quicker time than a couple years. I'm hoping to get it down to under 2 hours, even though it would be, I keep thinking, oh, this has got to be a series of 10 hours. But, really, you want people to get it. You want people's attention to hold for long enough. This can be a bit of a heady subject where folks' eyes glaze over. I'm sure you've had that experience when you're talking about money and economics and finance. But I think, with some of these really great characters that are involved, Stephanie and the others, and then these historical anecdotes that are just fascinating in and of themselves and are oftentimes new information for people, I think it can be woven together in a really entertaining way. And if it's told in the right order, I really think that's the key, is kind of taking people on this journey, giving them little pieces of information that keep them enthralled, maybe leave them with a question or a little cliffhanger, and then that, little revelations along the way then build up to this bigger revelation, maybe 3/4 of the way through the film. And that's really the sectoral balance graph, this symbol that I use as the title graphic. That symbol for me kind of brings everything together, this dual nature of money and kind of the balance and the mirror image. So when we say, MMT or Stephanie Kelton is going to flip everything you think you know about money, debt, and taxes upside down, that's really what I'm referring to, is the sectoral balance graph. You got to look at the upside down, the mirror image, Let me just jump in and describe that graphic that you use, because when I was watching the trailer, because we hadn't talked and you sent me the trailer, and that's the thing that really got me. My heart leapt, because at the end of the trailer, the logo artwork of the film, it's the U.S. Capitol building
in silhouette, and then it's reflected at the bottom through a horizontal line of symmetry. So you got this mirror image of the building reflected above and below the line, and that's, you know, a parallel with the sectoral balances chart that MMTers are familiar with. What I loved about it also is that you've got a black line going around the top and a red line going around the bottom. And I saw that and I just thought, oh, this person really gets it. You know, you're not just following a bunch of economists around and you're intrigued by them and what's going on with this. It's like you've actually, you've learned it. And you know, I figured at that point, like, you're a filmmaker that's grasped MMT right down to the root and gone right, I have to figure out how to tell this story. And that's, you know, I mean, me and Patricia kind of same thing, but we've kind of like, well, you know, we don't have your skills, so we're like, okay, we're just going to have I don't know, 100 long conversations about it. But I think it needs all of it, basically. You know, you need the blogs, you need the podcasts, you need the Facebook and videos, and you know, of all these different people, because I think more is more. You know, the more of this stuff that's out there, the better. But yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to write my show. I'm doing a live show about it, and I've got an hour basically, and it's the same thing where you know, in order for it to click, you're probably going to have to spend certainly a few months going over it, because that thing when people go, yeah, money is debt, any human that's been alive for a few years, you know, interacting with money will go, wait, no, debt is the opposite of money. You know, for me, if I go into debt, I've got less than money. You know, and it's like, yeah, that's what's happening on the government side of the ledger. Right. They're issuing debt to make money so that you've got a positive asset, you know, like, you know, you've got positive pounds, you know, and it is very hard for people to grasp. So yeah, what I was going to ask you is, you know, what are the key parts of MMT that you're leaning fully into? Because you've got to strike that balance of like getting people on the hook, but then not going too deep straight away. Otherwise, like you say, people glaze over. So, you know, with the film, I know it's not finished yet, but what are the key parts of MMT that you're leaning fully into? What might you have to leave out? And because I like the historical examples as well, can you talk about which ones you're putting in?
Yeah, definitely. And I would just say as well, you know, I think your piece could be so fascinating or so good. I mean, number one, the podcast is huge, and I think all of this media is really important, and you can explore so much more in a podcast than you could in a film, you know, so they definitely have, you know, their own uses and their own places. So yeah, I'm really glad, and I hope you guys keep exploring much more through the podcast. I'm sure you will. You know, if there's any way we can collaborate on the film too, we should talk about it. But, you know, bringing the comedy into that, I think that's key, because this is a dry subject, and really the best thing you can do in documentaries that are serious is to bring in as much comedy as you can. And luckily, Stephanie is, you know, a bit of a comedian herself, so she can do well at lightening the mood. So I'm trying to, you know, find those little moments. Yeah, she is. And I don't know if it's true, but I heard a story that if this career in economics didn't work out, her second choice would have been a stand-up comedian. That's just hearsay.
Her tweets are funny. So maybe that explains that. Exactly.
So I think that's really important, Christian, too, with your piece. I think there's a lot of comedy here and so much absurdity, too, in the conflict. So I guess, you know, starting with that, with everything I'm trying to include, you know, I want to include everything, so I'll have to figure out in the edit exactly what's going to fit and what's going to need to be cut. And I'm willing to cut, you know, whatever's unnecessary and just get it down to the core. But really, you know, maybe the core part of the story is partly this conflict that exists. And I think it's dramatic that there's this group, including Stephanie and, of course, Warren Moser at first, who, you know, really had the audacity to question the most preeminent economists in the world. You know, these Harvard economists, all the Ivy League economists, the advisors to presidents, the Treasury secretaries, the heads of the IMF. You know, they're all saying one thing. And this Wall Street trader and then this small group of academics from University of Missouri, Kansas City decided to say, no, you're all wrong. You know, and we're going to question the most fundamental basics of what you've built this entire edifice, this entire academic field of economics upon. I mean, they're questioning the very foundations, right, of mainstream economics. So
this Wall Street trader, the Wall Street trader you're talking about, just for newbies, is Warren Mosler. And I always think, in certain films at the beginning, you'll have like an office worker or an analyst or a scientist working alone, then suddenly being hit by an insight and like picking up the phone and running around trying to tell everybody about there's aliens coming or there's a meteor coming. And I think Warren's in that role, but it's better than a meteor because it's like, with a meteor, instead of a meteor, it's like, hey, exactly. I've discovered we've got infinite money. It's the opposite of a meteor. Let's get out there and stop people dying, But anyway, sorry, I interrupted your flow.
And apart from the, I see most of the interviewees are American, maybe for obvious reasons. Have you spoken to Bill Mitchell at all? Is he involved?
Yeah, actually, we did get an interview with him that same weekend at the 2019 MMT conference. So we do have an interview with him as well. Also, Nongo Sambastila, who is a Senegalese economist, he was at the conference, so we were very lucky to get to interview him while he was here in the States. At this point, I haven't had the budget to travel anywhere. So the folks that are a little further afield, I haven't gotten to yet, including Warren. I haven't shot with him yet, but I'm hoping to plan a very precise shoot around that and kind of get everything I need to travel down there with some really interesting visuals, as where he lives down in the Virgin Islands. So anyhow, Warren's an important part of the story. And really, I kind of look at it as maybe almost a classic underdog story where there's this small group of kind of fringe economists or this fringe group of people that are, it's comedic what they're trying to say. And they're getting ridiculed and they're getting, really almost abused in their professions. They've had to take a lot of abuse over these past decades. And it's the story, the question is this small group of radicals or, heterodox economists going to achieve their goal of actually, changing economics, creating a paradigm shift in economics? Will their ideas get traction and will they succeed in doing this? And that's maybe a bit of the drama. But I just love the conflict that exists where there's this small group of total underdogs telling the big old establishment, you're wrong. It's been really important to get the establishment position as well, explaining what they say in the textbooks. What is the orthodox story? What do they say about money? What gives money value? How did it evolve historically? Why the national debt is bad? How interest rates are set? These are kind of the fundamentals that MMT has almost opposite positions on, right? And so I really have to show this is what mainstream economists say every day, and then this is the recommendations they give based on that. This is a worldview they have based on that, and this is what MMT is saying, which is the opposite. So who's right? And, part of that question is interrogating and trying to tease out how could there be this question? How could there be this conflict to begin with, right? How could economists not have a good grasp of what money is or what debt is or how money is created? How could they not know that the federal government is the sole issuer of the US dollar? And then you find times where they admit it, right? MMT is really great at pulling out quotes of Alan Greenspan or Ben Bernanke or Joe Stiglitz or Larry Summers, all saying almost the same thing as what MMT says. They'll admit at certain times, no, of course, the US can never go bankrupt, but, inflation. So then they pivot a little bit, but it's still different than what they say in the textbooks. So a long-winded way of saying who knows what. Do these folks that are running the Treasury and advising presidents, do they really not know what these UMKC economists know? Have this small group of folks figured something out that the most top-tier economists have not figured out? Is that for real, or is it a conspiracy? Do these economists just not want the people to understand how money works because they want to control the system? I've kind of asked this question to a lot of folks I'm interviewing. People often say, it's a bit of both. It's a bit of both. It's a bit of a conspiracy and just a misunderstanding. Honestly, in my gut and the top tier economists I've spoken to and interviewed, I honestly think it is a misunderstanding. They've followed the textbooks. Their entire career is dependent on working within the system and not saying something different. And so they've taught this for years. They've advised this for years. They've testified to Congress on these ideas for years. And they're not going to all of a sudden turn around and say, oops, I was wrong. For the past decades, my entire career, was a waste. They just can't do that. I think their minds just won't even allow them to consider that. So it's much easier to just say, never mind, these people are wrong. So a lot of what I find is just this philosophical issue. What Felix Martin talks about it, in his book, Money, an Unauthorized Biography, and he kind of calls it a mistake on the level of ideas, that there was this break that happened, and this might be too much, but he likes to go back in history a lot, and he kind of identifies this break that happened in economics in the 1700s in Britain, and he says, it was really John Locke who caused this misunderstanding to start and then get perpetuated. He said, John Locke was maybe a liberal philosopher and was trying to protect democracy, was trying to protect, a republic, a new republic, or these more democratic ideals from monarchy. So he was saying, actually money is a real thing. Money is gold. And that means the monarchy can't mess with it. They can't abuse the power of money. By saying that, he was trying to protect democracy, trying to get more power away from the monarchy. But by doing that, he kind of started this long train, possibly, of people thinking that money is a real object found in nature, that money is gold, rather than what was understood a little bit more before the 1700s, that money was always a creature of the state and always managed by a monarch or a dictator or a king or a more communal, democratically organized type system.
From what I hear, I see that you're going pretty much into the kind of the politics behind economics or behind academia in general. Is this going to be part of the focus of the film? Is there any way in which we can improve the economics profession so that, to maybe not eliminate these things, but maybe reduce them? Or is that just seen as impossible and just part of the trade? So.
Yeah, I do think kind of the end of the film, once you kind of have this historical background and you've taken this journey to understand money and debt a little bit better, to understand where they come from and their fundamental nature as being creations of a state system, of a political body. Really, my point is, at the end, is that economics is no different, really, from politics. That people have a right to debate and understand these debates about what we're talking about in terms of economic policy. I think the whole idea at the end is to say that this thing we call the economy, is not an inexorable force of nature. We are not powerless to change the economy. We are not powerless and, we must appease it as if it were God. We just have to feed it, so that it's constantly growing and we're trying to keep it happy because, you don't want the economy to go bad. And it's always pitted against the environment or something. There's always this weird dichotomy that's saying, it's the economy versus the environment, something of that nature. I want to explore this as well, just being able to say the economy, what we mean by that is just how a society chooses to distribute the goods and resources that the people need to survive within that community. And that's basically what economics is. And backing up a little bit, all of the examples in the film will also be leading to another point, which is that money, if we start with the textbook definition, they start with the story of, money was invented by the market to make barter more efficient, right? This myth of barter, that first there was a market, everyone was kind of bartering and trading for goods and services with each other. And then they realized, this is really cumbersome. Sometimes we want to trade things, but I don't want what you have and you don't want what I have. So we have this double coincidence of wants. So obviously we're just going to invent something called money, and it's going to be a commodity that everyone's willing to hold and trade for other goods and services, right? And so if their order is, and this is found, in every textbook and even in comic books produced by the Federal Reserve from the 1950s up until today, they all say, so money was invented by this market to make barter more efficient. And then maybe later on down the road, the government comes along and taxes away some of that money for its own bad purposes, typically. But everything is reversed when you kind of look at maybe what's more found in the anthropological and historical record, that there never was this barter market, that markets, in history did not pre-exist money, that money, in fact, was found before the existence of markets. So, what does that say? And then when you understand that a sovereign, through first creating, first demanding taxes, then being able to issue a money token of his choosing to be returned by the people in payment of taxes, only then, is money created, and only then is a market and a monetary economy created. So it's only once a sovereign can create money through power, through coercion, through the force of violence imposed on collecting taxes, only then can money really start functioning. Only only then can laws be enforced that create this thing called the market. So from the beginning, right, everything is based on a political body, on politics, and on law. And that's why there's a lot of law professors involved in MMT as well, right? Christine Desan, Rowan Gray, Bob Hockett, Lua Yule, they're all lawyers. That's politics, right? Law is politics. So when we look at economics, if you follow kind of the myth of barter, that allows economics to extract itself from politics. It allows economics to say, first, the market existed and we invented money. And so really the market should be the dominant sphere of how money is organized. It should continue to remain in the private market and be managed by the private market. That would be best. A government intrusion is just that. It's just an intrusion that causes inefficiencies. Whereas if you have an alternative view that money is only created through a political body, through law, that markets are only created through a political body, through law, then you see that money and our economy itself always has a place within politics, that we create the rules of the game and we can change the rules of the game, right? The economy is completely up to us, how it functions. It's not a product of nature. And we see that, money and markets have to continue to be managed as they were originally, right? As if they're created through political management, then they need to continue to be managed. So I guess it really starts interrogating the entire philosophy and ideology of free market economics very specifically, which I think is obviously a dominant ideology. So obviously this is a long, complicated film, and the challenge will be to condense this and make it entertaining and have lots of people say this instead of just one person rambling on.
No. I think you said it perfectly, actually. I think you don't need to make the film now. We're just going to put this out.
Oh, good.
But I was going to say, yeah, there is that tension there. I think one of the barriers that comes up when you demonstrate that, so money's a creature of the state and a creature of laws. And, you sort of show this idea that tax collection makes the otherwise worthless pieces of paper, as Warren Mosley would put it, have value. Now you need to work for them to get them to pay the taxes. And Warren, I always bang on about his guy at the door with the machine gun allegory for money, which I love. But I've never really had a problem at seeing our system does have coercion in it. You'd have to be kind of blind not to see that. It doesn't bother me. The point is, in whatever time and place you live, there is going to be some agency, some group of people with a monopoly on force. That it doesn't seem to be any other way around that. And I think that's kind of how we got to having democracy such as it is now, by going, what's the best thing we can do given that force is kind of inevitable? How can we make it more democratic? So I always sort of, when I'm talking about the sort of coercive nature of taxation, I know that people's hackles are going up because they're like, I don't like the idea of people telling me what to do to get bits of paper to pay taxes and stuff. And it's like, yeah, I know, but you know what? Even though you don't like it, you've never been able to walk away from paying VAT. You've never been able to walk away from paying your income tax. So this is how it works, So I always like to just back it at one stage and go, but also the government needs to provision itself. Even if you can point to this and that you hate that the government does, there are roads. In the country I live in, we've got a national health service. We agreed that we wanted, even conservatives in our country are very supportive of the NHS. It's not like the States. We've generally agreed, there's consensus that we should have some things provisioned collectively instead of one private company building this stretch of road and then you got to pay a toll, and then when you turn into that stretch of road and stuff, we just figured out it makes no sense. It's not even efficient to do some things completely sort of Wild West laissez-faire style. And, the point is to democratize that power, not to go, right, well, there's this power and let's do away with it. Anyway, that was my turn to rant. Sorry about that. but I tend to always just sort of back it up and go, look, we're talking about a system where we gave the authority where we live power to do things. And the only way they can do those things that we voted them in to do is by having a money system.
No, just to add to that, because what you're saying, Christian, I think is quite relevant. And you mentioned, Maren, earlier about, this idea that the kind of the lie of the money was almost trying to take power away from an all-powerful king that was using it to coerce the population. And, it was almost seen as a means of countering the lack of democracy, kind of taking away from the power of money. And I feel that we often have similar debates today about that, about the coercive aspect of money. And the way I like to see it is that, the moment that a society decides to do things collectively, then the system inherently becomes coercive in the sense of keeping tabs of everyone's contribution. And money is the way to organize that collective effort. And so you'll have that element, but the way to make it more, the problem is who does the coercion. Right. Yeah. Rather than the all-powerful king who has no relation to the citizenship that he rules over, it is more about the citizenship itself should have power to organize itself, and that means ultimately democracy. Even though democracy, we are we're very far away from perfect democracies in this world, and everybody seems to have a different idea of which way to take democracy. But I think we can all start with the premise that the way to deal with money is not so much to take away its power, but to capture its power.
Exactly. I mean, to realize that it is fundamentally, a public good that's created by the public and is really just a tool. It's not a real thing. It's not a commodity. It's not a scarce commodity. It's just how we choose to organize our economy. It's the organizing tool. It's not something we don't have control over. We have it perfectly under control. And I think if we recognize that, if we look at that differently, and say, this is how the system works. So either you can have a complete dictatorship or, a complete military, something terrible, or a monarchy or what have you, or you can have something more resembling democracy. Like either way, this is the way the system's going to work. So it's up to you. Instead of this bit of this idea, MMT says, this is the way the system already works. So there's no point in keeping this knowledge from the people. I think a lot of times some economists say, well, we can't let the politicians know that they can spend as much as they want. They're just people. We can't trust them. And I think that's a lot of times what it comes down to is not trusting politicians. It's like, well, I don't necessarily trust the experts either. I would like there to be a semblance of accountability. I think that would be better off. And I think if we were all open about understanding how it worked, then we wouldn't have to worry as much. And MMT does a great job at explaining what you have to worry about, what the limits are. That politicians are not going to spend endless amounts of money because they really don't want to cause inflation. I think they'd be very cautious about that. Randy Ray and Stephanie all say that it's more likely that they'll spend too little. It's more likely that they'll err on the side of not causing inflation because that's one of the worst things you can do politically. But the fact that there is low-hanging fruit, as Stephanie calls it, there is more that we could do. What you were talking about a bit, Christian, just this idea that, taxes, it's a coercive power, and people get a little bit disturbed when they realize that their tax money is not contributing directly to the public good, because when the government collects it, it just destroys it or it just burns it. As Warren Moser likes to say, it's just deleted. Your tax dollars are destroyed when the government collects them. That itself should kind of change everything. And Lua said it very differently. She said people should be super excited to know that their money is destroyed, that the government destroys their tax money, because blah, 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 blah. That enables so much more to happen. So it's not, this kind of partisan division that we often see in the U.S., where I think a lot of folks, what it comes down to and the policies they believe in are that they think, in order to feed a hungry kid or, maintain a good education system or do all these things that people may want, they think that money is going to have to come out of my pocket. I'm going to lose something. I am going to lose what I have now. I have to give up some of what I have. Whereas when we see money differently, that the government there's low-hanging fruit that the government can employ resources that are unemployed currently or people that are unemployed without taking money out of people's pockets. If the government can hire anyone who wants a job within the borders of their country in their own currency, and this applies to a lot of developing countries, right? They can employ those people without taking money out of other people's pockets. And I think that's a lot of what it comes down to, and really could have a huge shift in the partisan divide, right?
Yeah, and I think that's really relevant to now as well, because we're all in lockdown and we're hearing about $2 trillion bailouts over there, we got our chancellor saying we're going to spend whatever it takes. If they manage to frame that as like, yeah, and of course we're going to increase borrowing in order to do the spending, they will get to tee the nation up for this like, well, you know, we borrowed all that money to spend on you guys, and now it's, you know, so so I'm very much trying to get people to focus on what's happening here and listen to these people. The Bank of England put out a statement this week that really reaffirmed we don't get the money from anywhere, we just make it up, which is good for us. But I'm every time that talking point pops up, I'm really trying to go, look, no, look, it's keystrokes. They're not taking it off anybody. I've been amazed over the years at how resistant people are to that. Some people really hate that sort of like, your tax money's being deleted. That just means that we could spend more. You don't have to have it taken off you. And you know, exactly as you say, Maren, it just I don't know, maybe some people have got like a savior complex or something, or like, you know, I'm spending this, I'm doing this for you, I'm giving you an NHS because of my tax money, I'm a taxpayer, and you know, and it's like, it's quite hard to fight if that mindset's been built up over a lifetime, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's this great bit in the trailer on Facebook. It's different to the earlier cut. The cut that you showed me, we've got Stephanie Kelton saying, we're at the then they fight you stage. And then there's a big pause and she goes, do I think we'll win? Then there's a pause and then she goes, it's going to be a hell of a fight. And the pause, there's something really animating her face, like burning underneath her face. There's so much resolve. I was like really moved by it. And I just, you know, and then the rest of that trailer has a sort of fight back theme to it. Is that version of the trailer available elsewhere, or? Yeah,
I believe that's the main one I have up now on the crowdfunding.
Oh, is it? Right, okay. Maybe I've just looked at the wrong thing. Great, yeah.
I have like a slightly a shorter one because Twitter only allows like a 2-minute video, so I cut that out for Twitter.
Got it, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just kind of a little bit going off of what you were just saying, again, just driving it home that, you know, that, and especially with the partisan divide as well, saying that your taxes are destroyed. I mean, that fundamentally changes what taxes are for. Right. And Stephanie says that should change everything about the budgeting process. Like, it's not a trivial difference that the taxes don't directly pay for things. What I really like to look at is we could completely change what we tax, you know, and why we tax. We don't really need to tax people's income necessarily. You know, why are we taxing good things, right? So this is it's a big thing in ecological economics. So we're kind of bringing it full circle that they like to say, you know, we should tax bad things, not good things. If we're destroying it anyway, if we don't need the revenue to pay for stuff, then why tax people for working? Why tax people's incomes? Why tax corporations for employing people? You know, Randy says, let's get rid of the payroll tax. We don't need that. Not a lot of Democrats or progressives are saying that. You know, let's lower the income tax. Normally, that's the Republican talking point. Let's cut your taxes. Guess what? I mean, if the Democrats were able to understand that we could cut people's income taxes, they would run away with the vote. I mean, right? So yeah. I think that
it's crazy. It's like we're giving you a gift here. You know, we're trying everything. It's insane how much resistance there is to it.
Yeah, but just briefly, you know, of course we still need to tax, right? I mean, you can't just cut all not tax at all. But Randy has a really great proposal in one of his books, and he's talked about it in the interview, that instead of taxing good things like income, we could tax bad things. And what he recommended in a way is a cubic footage tax on housing, right? I don't know if you've heard of this, but it would also have an environmental side to it, saying that, you know, you still need a broad-based tax, right, to drive the currency. Right now we use income tax, but instead you could do, in a way, a property tax, but it's based on cubic footage, so it's more progressive. So it goes up. The bigger your house is, if you have a mansion, you have a lot more cubic footage. And that cubic footage needs to be heated and cooled, which uses a lot of energy, right? So by doing that, you could have a progressive tax that also incentivizes maybe smaller houses and less environmental impact. So you'd be getting a little bit of incentives into that tax, right? Which is, again, what taxes are for. It's for incentivizing and for driving the currency and for taking money away from places where we maybe need less of it. So taxing, you know, even looking at more, you know, some carbon taxes, some other things, but not to raise money, right? It's to disincentive disincentivize or to bring down inflation if there are in certain sectors. So anyway, you guys know.
That could go a long way. I mean, if you see that, as we know that the rich, their carbon footprint is a lot larger than poor people's, right? Considerably. So by taxing, say, luxury goods or things like that, or travel miles maybe, or things like square footage, like you mentioned, would that be the best way to address inequality, say?
Yeah, partly. Yeah. You want a progressive tax in order to minimize inequality, right? But again, they say, let's tax, now we have these debates. And Stephanie says we really, really need to separate the debate from let's tax the rich. Let's have a wealth tax of 2% so that we can pay for free college. And they always link it. Elizabeth Warren or even Bernie Sanders will say, we need this tax to pay for this thing. And otherwise, we can't have this thing. Otherwise, we can't have free college. Otherwise, we can't have childcare. Whereas this way of looking at taxes says, no, we need to tax the wealthy and we need to do these investments. They're separate. Let's go ahead and do the investments. We don't need to wait to tax the rich, right? Let's go ahead and provide healthcare. Let's go ahead and provide childcare if that's what we need. Then let's go back and tax the wealthy because they're too rich. You just take their money and destroy it. You're not using it anyway. So the only reason you're taxing them is because they're too rich. And then maybe you tax more than 2%. If that's your reason for taxing them is to lower inequality, if your reason is not to pay for a program, you're going to probably tax more than 2% because you want to start lowering their wealth. If you're only taking 2%, you're not really eating into even their interest income. So as Randy gets a little more radical in saying how much we should take. He goes much further than AOC or Bernie. But if you really want to start addressing inequality, you take a lot more than 2%. Yeah,
I mean, that's been something that I've never really thought over or managed to get a satisfying sort of response to, because I don't even know how to ask the question. But it seems to me that taxing away inequality is not going to work. To me, we need to go, all right, we need to say a number, and any richer than this number, and you have got enough money to control politics and that's why it's too much, and that's why we have to just take it off you when it gets to that limit, because all the laws limiting how much you can put into politics don't work. They find ways around it. And of course, it's not really about politics in terms of like funding politicians and PACs. It's like you can make pieces of entertainment. You can chuck millions at films. Most films are reinforcing the rugged individualism narrative. And, there's no, there's been maybe, you're a filmmaker, so you'll be able to put me straight, Maren. But as far as I know, there's been one film about collective action, and that was Salt of the Earth. Which kind of came out at the same time as On the Waterfront. And it was kind of like the left-wing version of On the Waterfront, where, in On the Waterfront, you've got like a corrupt wrong'un who's the leader of the union. And, Salt of the Earth is about how a strike actually sort of liberated workers. And I don't think there's ever been anything that's really made that sort of reinforced, look, we don't win unless we all win. Exactly. So all I'm saying is, even if you get money out of quote unquote politics, it's still there. It's still, our storytelling apparatus, Hollywood and HBO and Netflix and stuff like that. That really does form a large part of politics. I know I don't know if I'm sounding crazy here, but the things that we think are important and the things we think we can change are influenced by the stories we tell and repeat. So it is very tricky to go and sort of think about how we can stop money influencing politics. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that before we wrap up.
Yeah. And just to say, definitely the story we tell about money matters. It really changes everything. So that's why I'm looking at it so much as a story, the myth of barter. Where are these stories coming from? It's the stories we tell. So it's just what you're saying, to get these concentrations of wealth, they're damaging to democracy in a couple ways. Just people being able to buy out politicians, so the corrupting influence on our democracy directly. But like you're saying, the concentrations of wealth that lead to such concentrations of power through media, through everything throughout our democracy is very destabilizing, right? When we see these levels of inequality, Robert Reich points out always, this is not good for society. If we want to address that, if we want to address protecting our democracy, then we have to challenge the ideology as well that the rich have earned all of their money, right? Or that It's their hard-earned money. We can't take it away from them. They earned it fair and square. And Stephanie likes to say, instead of saying we need to tax the rich so that they pay their fair share, we need to prevent the rich from taking more than their fair share of the public good, of the public resource of money. They've kind of been taking too much than their fair share. And so they're very much dependent on the entire society that we live in. Bill Gates could never be the billionaire that he is without the education system and the infrastructure that has enabled him, and, the government of the United States enforcing intellectual property laws, enforcing private property laws. He could never amass the billions he has without the entire structure created by, the public sphere. So when we're talking about that, I think getting money out of politics, again, I would totally agree with picking a number, and we can pick it democratically. I don't care what the number is. Maybe it's 40 million, maybe it's 400 million. I don't know. But let's pick a number, and say that's rich enough. Like, no one needs to be richer than that. And if they earn more than that, it just gets destroyed. It just gets deleted back. It just gets returned. So that's what Randy Rice says. You pick a number, anything above that, you take the rest. Yeah. You just take the rest.
I just think that's the conversation we've never had, whereas you will go like, well, if you've got this much plutonium, you're probably not going to do anything good with it. So we've got a law about that. Or, if you happen to be caught with this much cannabis on you, you're probably a dealer. So we're going to treat you differently. You know what I mean? Whereas, maybe that's the piece that's missing, like an analysis of how much money is dangerous. At what level does a bank balance of a conglomeration of people even, not just an individual, at what level does it start to destabilize our democracy? And I know these sound like very hard to pin down terms, but I think until we do pin them down, we're always going to come up against this. Because that's why people really want to hang on to the idea that we're taking money off the rich and giving it to the poor, because it gives them a reason to have taxes.
Right.
Whereas if we can replace that reason, it's like, no, we can always spend what we want on the poor because, the government creates money when it spends. Then they kind of get this sense of agoraphobia of like, well, God, I don't know what to do with the taxation side of that equation now, because, we've never been in a position where we've even, been allowed to tell anybody you're too rich. We've always had to tell them you're too rich because it's taking money off poor people. And we need to have this new conversation of like, no, you're too rich because, this study proves that when people get this rich, this thing happens, and that destroys our entire fabric, our entire social fabric. And maybe, anyway, I'm just spitballing here.
So when it comes to politics then, because obviously the kind of big point of contention between left and right at the moment is the level of taxes, and not for the reasons that we know, but partly because when you have full employment, say in a society where you have full employment, which we haven't had ever, I don't think, you would, if the state wants to organize more resources, which is usually the point of the left, you would have to make some sort of fiscal space, and that often means taxes, right? So if you have, I'm just thinking about a scenario where you don't have income taxes per se, but then you impose a limit on both capital gains, say, and income tax, and say you don't need any more than that. We'll take the rest. Thank you very much. So would the left and the right then be kind of fighting over what that level might be? Because I'm just thinking, if that was the case, if the right was then saying, no, you should be able to earn 5 billion a year if you want to. It's much harder to justify, isn't it, than to simply say you can't tax everybody 5% more. It's much easier for the left to make a case then.
Yeah, I mean, everything is still going to be politics, right? There's still going to be terrible disagreement, and we're never going to agree on most things. So, but I think at least if the political debate is based on more of an accurate reality, that would really help. Like, let's debate what we're actually talking about. Because right now the debate is totally obscured by these false assumptions, so we can't even have a debate. Our debate is just, it's built on the wrong foundation, the wrong premise. How can you debate something accurately when all you're talking about is, well, I don't want to have to pay more in taxes in order to pay for this? You're not talking about anything, accurate then. Let's have a real political debate. Let's improve the political debate by talking about exactly that. How much is too wealthy? That would be a productive political debate. It's
almost like the current taxation kind of structure obscures the real underlying debates, and kind of puts a lot of people off from discussing economics.
Exactly.
So, what I was going to say is, to bring it back to the film, this is going to be a really great organising tool for activists to get us closer to that real debate.
Yeah.
I think it's really going to break through, but we need to get it made. And there's a way for people to help, Maren. So can you tell us about that before we wrap up?
Yes, thank you. I'm bad at that, but I know we're entering, what's probably going to be a tough time for everyone in the economy. It would totally depend on our government response, right? This is a real crisis, but depending how our government responds will depend, how well we come out of this. If people's jobs and incomes are maintained, it will be up to the government. If we have a long jobless recovery, like after the 2008 crisis, where we failed fairly miserably at creating jobs because of the misperceptions of what the government could do and the enormous fears around the government debt. But I guess I should bring it back to the film, that I'm trying to crowdfund right now. So it's going, really well. I'm really so appreciative of the support that has already come from this MMT community. And, there's already a great audience that you and everyone else has been building over decades who, really understand this story and care about it and want to so many people's whole mission is to just share these ideas to improve the public debate. I think that's really what it comes down to. We care about creating a better world for people and for the planet. And so we need to look at what we can do to accomplish that. And that's going to involve politics. It's going to involve organizing, and it's going to involve organizing our collective resources. So there's already, an amazing audience, and I'd love to connect with this audience that already exists. And so through the crowdfunding, I'm getting to know folks, and folks can get involved by donating to support the film. Or if you have other suggestions or other ways to get involved, if you're creative as well, or if you're a filmmaker, or if you're an animator or a graphics design person.
It's all about the real resources, right?
Right. I definitely need to find some money, but if I somehow found all the right resources and could put them together, that would also work. So I'm looking for some money right now. Some great, if anyone has suggestions in terms of maybe larger foundations. I have a fiscal sponsor for this film, so any donation is tax deductible, I suppose, in the U.S., or for foundations as well. They can give a grant or a donation if you're familiar with any family foundations or this sort of thing who are maybe interested in these issues of inequality and new economic thinking and climate change and progressive politics in a way. So again, the goal, I think, not to seem terribly partisan, but it really is just to improve this public debate and break down some of the really damaging partisan divides that we're seeing now between right and left. I really want this film to appeal to all sides of the political spectrum so that we can kind of talk about the issues that really matter.
No, I was going to say MMT is a matter of life and death right now, isn't it? So I wish you the best of luck, and people donate. So
I think that's a great place to leave it.
Yeah, I just can't thank you guys enough for the work you do too, and for having me on. It's just great to talk to you all, and some camaraderie with folks who understand, I think, what a challenge communicating these ideas is, but also how important, how vital it is, how relevant it is right now. I wish the film could come out tomorrow and help this current situation and help alleviate, I think, some of the suffering that is obviously already here and coming. The sooner we get it funded, the sooner it will be made, and the sooner it will be made public. So anyhow, just thank you guys.
Yes.
It's great to talk to you, Maren. Great to talk to you, Patricia.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon.
Okay, have a good night.
We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Okay, bye. That was the MMT podcast with Patricia Pino and Christian Riley. Don't forget, you can support the show through Patreon, starting at $1 a month, and get early access to all our episodes and patron-only episodes. You can do that by going to patreon.com/MMT podcast. You can also find me on Twitter at MMT podcast, and you can find Patricia on Twitter at Patricia N. Pino. And you can email us at mmtpodcast@outlook.com. Editing and post-production was by Damien Caldwell.
Thanks for listening.